what up, Long Beach? Welcome back to your home for everything local sports. Another episode of Long Beach Sports Talk, where we are the home of the big game this weekend, and it's always a good time to look back to 2008. As always, I am co-sports editor JJ Fiddler to my right.
Co-sports editor Mike Gardabasio, still reading the sponsors. That's my job that I remember. First off, obviously, Naples Rib Company, the sponsor of everything we do at GazetteSports.com and the Press Telegram. And, of course, our new sponsor, Long Beach Transit, whose route number 1 now goes to Cal State Dominguez Hills, the South Bay Pavilion, and the StubHub Center.
2 massive high school football games this weekend. Number 1, number 2, I think it's more of a 1A, 1B situation. You've got St. John Bosco and Mater Dei in a Trinity League clash at the Santa Ana Bowl here in Southern California. Meanwhile, in Northern California, Concord to be specific, it's Long Beach Poly. It's De La Salle. It's happening again. We will get to the Braves and Monarchs, but we have got to talk about this Jackrabbit Spartan battle that comes 14 years after these two teams met for the first time at Veterans Memorial Stadium in what was then talked about as the national championship.
It was the first ever time that the number 1 team had played the number 2 team in the country. It was also the first ever nationally televised high school football game. So it really was the event of events at the time.
We will get to the matchup between these Jackrabbits and Spartans in just a second, but let's turn the clock back. Like I just said, it's always a good time to look back at 2008. Well, it's a good time to look back at 2001, 2002. At this point, Mike is living in Long Beach, and I am coming to Long Beach State. Not really sure what I wanted to do with the future and my education, but I knew one thing for sure. If I was going to come to Long Beach, I was going to teach myself more about Long Beach Poly football. I go to the Long Beach State University Library. One book sticking out. It's called One Great Game. It's written by now our friend, Don Wallace. This book is amazing. And little did I know that this book about what it's like to play football at Poly, the ultimate inner-city public school, and what it's like to play football at De La Salle, the ultimate football factory that's a private school, he took those two things and clashed them together so perfectly where you still had respect for both at the end of the day, but you knew that you were rooting for one.
Well, and you certainly understood the difference between the programs. That book was really, the funny thing about it, I and many other people in Long Beach were so heartbroken about that game that I didn't read the book until just a couple years ago when I was actually doing research for the Football in Long Beach book that I wrote. And Dawn found out I hadn't read it and busted my balls pretty relentlessly about it, actually. It was like, we've been friends a couple years, you know everything about this game, you love Long Beach as much as you do, and you haven't read this book. And I had to agree with them, and I sort of understood where you came from as an outsider coming into the city. I think not just in terms of sports, but culturally, this might be kind of the book to give people to sort of understand, look, there's talent here, and it comes with some weird problems, and, there's rich people here, and there's very poor people here, and it's really just this big blend of all these different types of personalities. And so seeing it through your eyes, actually, I thought about you a fair amount while I read the book. I thought, what if this is the first thing I'd read about Long Beach sports? Well, it's pretty good.
It was powerful, my friend.
Good first book, for sure.
Yeah, it was powerful. The scene at Veterans Memorial Stadium that night is something that I'll never get to experience. You got to experience that. Basically, the entire city of Long Beach got to experience that because they brought in the extra stands for that one, right? And it was played on grass. Think about that for a second.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of weird little details I think people forget. This was not that long after 9/11. First of all, which is sort of its own little thing, Maurice Jones-Drew, who everyone remembers as a powerhouse high school running back, they'd actually only played him at safety on their team that year to really kind of surprise Poly when they come out and, oh crap, that All-American safety is also the running back. And of course, he would go on to be known by millions of football fans as a running back. There's also the fact that the stands on the other side of the field from the normal grandstands are the Grand Prix stands. The Grand Prix grandstands they put up right along Shoreline, that's what I would say sort of the new people were all sitting on. Most of us who normally went to high school football games in Long Beach, I was a senior in high school at the time, we were sort of in our normal spot. But I did realize what an event it was. We sort of knew because you saw signs all over town. The Winchells that was right by Milliken on Palo Verde had a sign that said Go Poly. Really everyone kind of united behind, let's have Long Beach represent for our public schools here and beat this team. We sat down, again, our normal seats at Vets, right? Like I'd sat in those seats, I think, really the last 2 years with my friends. And right in front of us was the actress who played the daughter on the Damon Wayans show, which we were all like fans of at the time. And I just remember sitting down and we're like, wow, this is weird.
You guys walked into a Laker game and a high school football game broke out.
Kind of. It was strange. But yeah, the noise, the excitement, kind of the build-up to it. I mean, the Press Telegram had a special section. You had all this media coming in. And you know how Vets is. I mean, it's a state. How many times have we covered football games at Vets?
Yeah.
You know, but probably 100 times. And it was just the way that it is, but with ESPN and USA Today and Sports Illustrated. And it was really crazy. And I also think, truthfully, probably the most talent that's ever been assembled in one high school football game. You look at the number of guys who went not just to college, but to the NFL out of that game. And it's kind of overwhelming. I think Poly alone had 9 guys in that game across their 3 or 4 years who made it to the pros. I mean, that's nuts. And then obviously look at De La Salle, had a couple guys as well as Maurice Jones-Drew. He and Mercedes Lewis, who played against each other, would go on to be teammates at UCLA and then in Jacksonville. It really is just a unique moment. And I'll share something maybe that Don Wallace has told us that maybe not everybody knows. Sports Illustrated had ready to go a Long Beach Poly cover if the Jackrabbits won and beat the streak, but they didn't win, and so it was like a tennis player or something.
and somewhere in a third world country, someone's wearing that Sports Illustrated cover as a shirt. This is also an advertisement for you to go buy. One great game. A shout out again to Don Wallace.
Back in print.
Talking to him this week about this game that is back in print. You've got to pick it up. You don't have to read it during football season even. If you're like pining for football in the middle of the summer, just pick this book up. It's a fantastic read. The way that Poly team played is different than the way, let's say, the future Raul Lara Poly teams would play. Oh yeah, by the way, that's Raul Lara's first game as Poly football head coach. Excuse me, third game is Poly, but his first season. It's crazy how many things are actually tied to what we see now in the local area. Anyways, that team played very different. You go to flash forward to 2008, right? At that point, after I had been at Long Beach State for a while and had experienced Poly football, I then knew this is what I want to do. I want to write sports, right? So we try to break through. We create something special. We do the LB Post thing. In 2008, Poly, the defense that for me is the best high school football defense I've ever seen, is in the playoffs. They go to Esperanza. We travel out there to Valencia High School, and I gotta say, man, driving to that game, I felt like I made it, dude. I made it. I came here to Long Beach. I wanted to do this football thing, and now I'm doing it. This is awesome. So obviously we go there. I was with your brother Matt, actually, and my late friend Tim Pittsford. R.I.P. buddy, I love you. And Timmy was doing the defensive stats for me because I didn't have the skills to take stats. Basically, Timmy just taking George Daly Lyle's tackle count was really what those defensive stats turned into. So that Poly team goes on to play in the state championship. They win the CIF title against Tesoro that year, right? So you taking that Poly team now, Raul's gone. You know, there's a lot of people who were there at that point aren't there anymore. You've got a new Poly team, but I think that this weekend, Friday night in Concord, if Long Beach Poly is to win that game, they will win it with defense. They got to get turnovers. They got to get big stops. They got to make De La Salle uncomfortable at their home, in their shoes, running the same thing. We skate to one song and one song only, man. We're bringing the beer. Here we come. Poly needs to bring some of that old school 2001, 2008 attitude, hard nose to, what did Mike Tyson say? Everybody's got a plan until you punch him in the mouth.
Yeah, I've said that at a couple Poly football practices. A kid or two will come up, and they like their defense over there, understandably. It's a good defense. But the kids will say, hey, is this the best Poly defense you ever saw? And I was kind of laughing at them, and I go, man, I've seen Poly football teams that would eat you guys for lunch.
They would single-handedly win playoff games.
Right,
the defense.
Right, well, you think about that 2007 team. It's not the 08 team you were talking about, but in 2007, Poly won a game 2-0 in the CIF semifinals.
2-0!
And you really think about what that means and the discipline that takes to not give up a field goal in 48 minutes against a team that's got 5 Division I guys on their offense. You know, I mean, that was... There were those teams where they cared so much about every yard, and I don't think it's no knock against this year's Poly's team. I don't think I've seen any high school team since then care that much about every level. They wanted to win everything. You know what I mean? No one wanted to get beat on. No one wanted to be blocked. No one wanted to have their guy beat him, even if it's on the backside of the play, and it doesn't matter. They were so competitive, and they were legitimately so physical that even though it was not by far the most talented Poly defense we've seen, 2012 had way more talent than the 2008 defense, but that 2008 team just had something special about their attitude and their character. And I agree with you. I think if this year's Poly defense can kind of find that Poly spark and get hungry, this De La Salle team's laid the ball on the carpet a fair amount this year.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's sort of like easier said than done. You say, well, they only run the 4 plays, and they have a couple passing plays, but they're in that VR offense. Well, that was the case in 2001 too, and that Poly defense was stacked and just couldn't get them off the field on some drives, Now, for Antonio Pierce, his team hasn't really given up drives even against Bishop Gorman this year. They didn't give up a lot of drives. It was long plays for touchdowns. So I think that ability to be disciplined, make all the tackles, because they did miss tackles against Bishop Gorman.
Everybody's been missing tackles this year, something we haven't talked about.
You're not allowed to teach kids how to tackle anymore.
Holla!
But I think you certainly could see the defense lead the way in that, and I think that's kind of what everyone's curious to see, because that's where the bell's got to be answered. I think this Poly team can score on De La Salle for sure, but can you keep them from doing what they do in their own stadium? And again, more talented Poly teams than this one have tried and failed, so it's definitely a big task, but there is always that possibility that they'll sort of have that Poly inspiration, create an early fumble, flip things upside down and really get the game going in their direction.
So let's talk about these Spartans for just a second. They dropped their season opener this year to Trinity, a powerhouse from Texas, 26-21, but they then won 5 straight games while outscoring those opponents 215-39. They've won their last 2 games by shutout, one of those over Granite Bay, who we've seen in a state title game here in Southern California. And like we said, man, it is the Veer offense. You know what's coming at you. The problem is stopping it. They run the ball ad nauseum up there at Concord. They've attempted 63 passes this year. Their quarterback, Sweeney, can throw the ball, but he runs the ball mostly. 55 carries for their QB, 231 rushing attempts this season for the Spartans, and I think 5 of their running backs have over 20 carries so far this year, a stable of senior running backs. Mike mentioned it though, they have put the ball on the carpet. They have fumbled 23 times this year. Only lost 10 of them, but to say that you put the ball on the ground 23 times is saying a lot for a team. Halfway through the year for a team that is a top 5 team in California, and with a couple more victories and maybe some postseason success could get into that top 5 in the country. I think we can talk more about this game as we get up closer to it, but obviously you've got to get on both websites. Follow us on Twitter to make sure you're getting all the breaking news where you're traveling up to Concord, so we will let you know how the trip is going for the Poly Jackrabbits. Of course, how the game goes, and then the aftermath, which honestly could go either way. I could see this De La Salle team just staying on the field, running the ball, executing 6 to 7 minute drives, scoring. Maybe it's a field goal, maybe it's a touchdown. But at the end of the half, if it's 21-0 De La Salle, 24-0 De La Salle, I think Poly's in trouble. At the same time, I think it's equally possible that Poly does get those big plays on defense early in the game and kind of muddles the water a little bit, and then it's a coin flip. And I honestly do think it's 50-50.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be a really interesting game. Certainly a lot of questions for both sides. I don't think this is the De La Salle team that a lot of people thought we were going to see this year. I don't think they're as good as we thought they'd be, and I don't think that the Poly team is as bad as a lot of people thought they'd be given how young they are. So it is kind of 2 teams meeting in the middle. I'll say this. Poly's got to have kind of a good performance against them, because they took a big hit in the CIF rankings after the big loss to Bishop Gorman, and they need to stay in those top 4 spots. This is a team that, because they're so young, needs to build its confidence throughout the playoffs. They don't want to play a Mater Dei or a Bosco in the first or second round, in the second round. So you really, if you're Poly, really need a good performance, I think, against this De La Salle team. It almost is kind of like a pre-playoff game, even though it does come in the middle of the league schedule.
Perfect bridge to that Trinity League matchup, because does the loser of St. John Bosco and Mater Dei fall behind Long Beach Poly if they lose to De La Salle?
No.
I don't think that's fair.
Well, I think if Bosco beats Mater Dei badly, I would expect to see Mater Dei fall. I think if Poly loses badly to De La Salle, I would expect to see him fall. Just because, they dropped, 4 spots. Poly dropped 4 spots in the rankings for losing to the number 1 team in the country on the road. right? Which doesn't, while Bishop Amat moved up for beating Sherman Oaks Notre Dame at home. I don't really understand how that process works all the time. I think if Poly wins, they'll move over whoever loses the Bosco Mater Dei game.
Right.
But no, I would be very surprised. Say Mater Dei loses to Bosco and Poly loses to De La Salle. I'd be surprised if Poly moves over Mater Dei.
If Mater Dei does win that game, how do you move Bosco behind Poly, even if Poly wins?
You can't.
You can't, right?
Well, if Poly wins and Bosco loses, you could, I guess. Yeah. But it's, I don't know.
It would have to be one-sided. If those are two close games, you're talking about if one play goes differently, you're in a top 4 seed or you're not in a top 4 seed. You didn't even play a game in the section this week.
And that's the reason we talk about the rankings. I know there's a lot of people who are like, oh, do the talking on the field. I get all that. The thing is, with the way that the CIF playoffs are set up, those top 4 spots are really important because it's a big difference between playing Bosco in the second round and playing them a week later, right? You just want the ease in as opposed to, everyone's tough in the Pac-5 now with the way that it's set up, but you still don't want to play one of the top 4 teams until the semifinals.
And a third round game gets you a possible home game because if you played at home in the first round, playing at home in the second round is usually a tough draw.
One thing is clear, though, with St. John Bosco ranked number 2 in the Pac-5 division and Mater Dei ranked number 3, both teams are 6-0. Both teams are 1-0 in the Powerhouse Trinity League. This will be the game of the week. It is not on television, but it will be streamed on Fox Sports Prep Zone. You can just expect everyone to be at this game at the Santa Ana Bowl. Both these teams nationally ranked. Obviously, a lot of hard feelings between the two of them.
Some great games these two teams have had in the last few years, including in the playoffs.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. I personally think Bosco is the best team in the country. I've seen Bishop Gorman, who's ranked number 1. I think Bosco is better than them. I haven't seen Mater Dei in person, but I do expect Bosco to win. I'll just be curious to see how it plays out. But to me, Bosco's kind of the... it's saying a lot to say you think a team is underrated at number 2 in the country in the USA Today poll, but that is how I feel. I think they're, to me, clear-cut better than Bishop Gorman. But this will be a big test for a team that does have some young players to go on the road and play Mater Dei in Santa Ana. The Monarchs led this year by the freshman quarterback, JT Daniels, who is completing 68% of his passes with 18 touchdowns and just 1 interception. Obviously, the running back, Brandon LaMarche, the senior, 137 carries. He's averaging 142 yards a game with 12 touchdowns on the season, averaging over 6 yards a carry. So the test to me for the Bosco defense, which has actually been way better, I think, than pretty much anyone other than Jason Negro expected them to be this year.
Totally agreed. We said on this show that was the biggest question mark of this season.
Yes, and they've really, really proven themselves. But they get a chance to prove themselves against, I would say, the toughest team they face. It's hard to go on the road and beat 2 defending state champions, which they did. But I think that Mater Dei, just pads on the field, is the best team that they will have played. So we're really going to find out what this Bosco team is about on Friday.
Obviously can't be 2 places at once, but we will. So make sure you're following us on Twitter at PT Gazette Sports for all of the live score updates. That's it. That's all. There ain't no more. Another episode of Long Beach Sports Talk is in the books. We're keeping it short and sweet this weekend because it is time to get down to some real big-time pigskin. Those football games we just mentioned on Friday night are taking all of our energy building up to the weekend, and we are going to give that to you full force with the coverage, videos, photos, articles, everything.
Unless I'm at the hospital with my wife who's 38 weeks pregnant and we're having a baby. So.
Shout out to Shawza. Thanks everybody for reading, getting to the websites, listening to this show. For everybody at the Press Telegram and the Gazette newspapers, thank you for helping us put all of that out there, including this show. For Mike, for JJ, for everybody else that thinks back on sports memories and just sheds a tear of joy. It's the best thing, dude. It's the best. I'll see you guys in the stands this weekend. Take care.